Hello, friends. Welcome to the Tiger Moon YouTube channel. Tonight we have a story with the atmosphere of a village and events that could only happen there. As the saying goes, nothing is impossible in the realm of possibility. Hello, I am Hossein Musavi, your fellow countryman from one of the villages of Iran. At the moment, I am only one step away from turning 60 years old. I will quickly get to my story, a story that is full of adventures. The sunset of that day was the beginning of everything. Shaban never returned from the forest, the place where he always took his cows and sheep. Even though the villagers did not think highly of him, they headed toward the plains and the forest between the two mountains. Perhaps they were also tempted by the sheep that were left behind. Shaban was a middle-aged man who, in his youth, lost his father, mother, sister, and brother on the village road. They all fell into a ravine while riding in a minibus. Instead of comforting him in his grief, the villagers accused him of being cursed. But rather than staying home, Shaban was always outside. Before the sun rose, he would leave with his flock to graze, and he would be the last one to return. To anyone who didn't know him, it seemed as if he had found companionship somewhere outside the village. From those days on, he distanced himself from the villagers. At the beginning of every month, he would release 20 of his sheep into the village and say, "Whoever catches them, they are yours." He never attended village meetings. Whenever money was needed, he would send a messenger. That messenger was me, along with a letter envelope filled with money. The villagers were furious about the way he kept acting superior. Gradually, the envelopes were returned, and the released sheep were tied in front of his house. Of course, Shaban always had an excuse for not showing up. He would say, "I'm sick." But what kind of illness was it that never left him for 12 months of the year? And besides, what kind of sick man had enough strength to take a flock out to graze every single day? There was something else. Shaban's grazing ground was different from everyone else's. Everyone took their flocks to the plains, but he took his into the forest. Well, calling it a forest is an exaggeration. It was a patch of small trees that had grown between two mountains where rainwater collected. People said Shaban always camped there, little by little. The conflict between Shaban and the villagers began to take shape. A war was coming, an unequal war, one with no winner. It all started with the bells. Shaban hung bells around the necks of all his poor animals. The sheep bells were one thing, but the cow bells were practically church bells. The noise they made throughout the village, clang, clong, made it sound as if Alexander the Great's army was marching through, no matter how much the villagers complained. We have sick people. Babies get scared. He paid no attention. It was as if he had no choice. Fathali, may God curse him, was the one who sparked everything. In fact, he was also the one who first brought up the issue of Shaban acting superior. One day, shortly after Shaban returned, Fatali shouted loudly, "If you remove those bells, fine. But if you don't, I'll kill every sheep of yours that I can, and the first sheep will be you." That night, for the last time, Shaban released the gifted sheep into the village. The next morning, when he stepped outside, the dead bodies of the sheep were lying in front of his house. Some of them were still struggling between life and death. Fathali and 3 or 4 of his drinking companions were hiding behind a hill, waiting to see Shaban's reaction. Shaban put down 2 or 3 of the surviving sheep to end their suffering, then set off once again with his noisy flock. Fatali was enraged by his indifference. He stepped out from hiding and shouted, "Curse the graves of your parents. May shame fall upon you. I swear to God, if you come back here again, I'll make you haram, you bastard." When he said bastard, Shaban paused, but then he ignored him and continued on his way. Back then, everyone wondered what Shaban did with the milk and wool from his sheep. He always wore brand new clothes. It looked less like he was going shepherding and more like he was going to a celebration. Anyway, as the sun set once again, Alexander's army returned. Everyone was sitting on their rooftops, or near the village entrance, watching the flock. Then suddenly, the whistle of a gunshot shattered the scene. The weak cry of Shaban's dairy cow showed that the first bullet had struck her. Before anyone could react, a second bullet hit the same poor animal. She collapsed to the ground. Shaban turned and looked toward the hill. Fatali was staring directly into his eyes. Finally, Fatali became furious at Shaban's silence. After slamming his rifle against a rock, he charged toward him. He grabbed Shaban by the shoulders and shouted, "Are you even human, you animal?" Shaban pushed Fatali's hands away and continued walking. The next morning, I saw Azrael leave Fatali's house, holding the hand of Fatali's eldest son. Fatali was crying in the cemetery and saying, "My young son went to sleep healthy and never woke up." Even that did not teach him a lesson. He spread rumors that Shaban knew witchcraft and should be driven out. Together with his followers, he surrounded Shaban's house and threw stones at it. Every time Shaban came outside, he simply looked at the crowd and said nothing. Until one day, he stared directly into Fatali's eyes and said, "Was the first one not enough?" Fatali, who had been waiting to hear those words, grabbed Shaban by the collar, but he was no match for him. After a long struggle, Shaban finally shoved him backward and said, "Fear God, Fatali, fear God." The next day, Shaban took his flock to the grazing grounds and never returned. Almost the entire herd came back on its own. Only the donkey and a few sheep were missing. All the bells had been removed from the sheep and hung around the neck of one of the cows. Very soon, the villagers noticed a piece of paper. It was a handwritten note from Shaban. It read, "Divide the flock among yourselves, halal, but do not set foot inside my house. Burn everything, and hand the ashes over to the water. Every wrong you have done to me, I forgive, but if anyone sets foot inside my house..." Fatali never read the rest. Instead, he let out a mocking laugh. He ran toward the mosque and, through the loudspeaker, called the entire village together. Back then, my father was not feeling well, so he sent me in his place. I grabbed a few cigarettes from his cigarette pack. The single gas burner in the yard was lit. My mother always said we had to save money. I lit my first cigarette on the burner and headed toward the mosque. I did not have a good reputation in the village. After all, I was the only person who thought Shaban was a good man. Sometimes I would bring him bread and sheep butter. Every time he would offer me a crisp $10 bill, but I never accepted it. The last time I refused his money, he placed a hand on my head and prayed for me. At the same time, he slipped a ring into my pocket. Even now, I don't know why, but I never returned that ring. The mosque was not crowded yet. I sat directly across from Fatali. Little by little, the mosque filled with the old men of the village. Fatali began speaking. "That bastard wrote this part in red ink. Damn his handwriting. Now this useless fool thinks he's so important that he doesn't want us touching his property. Besides the flock, tomorrow I'll open his house myself. I'll answer to God if I have to. Whatever is inside that house will be divided among the people, just like the flock. God curse him, his existence brought us nothing but trouble." His arrogance and shamelessness had me burning inside, like the fire at the tip of my cigarette. I tossed the cigarette into Fatali's pants and said, "Why are you talking nonsense? This poor man did more good for the village than you ever did. I worked for him for a year. He always paid me. But what about you? Fatali threw the cigarette away and said, "We never told you to become a servant of a sorcerer. At 6 in the morning, I'm opening the devil's house. Whatever is inside belongs to everyone." I was only 5 steps away from him. I lunged forward. My first punch landed right beneath his eye. He was stunned, but his teenage followers didn't allow a second punch. They made me pay for the first one. Fatali's face was swollen with rage. The veins in his neck bulged like those of a furious bull. He shouted, "You think I'm stupid enough to let you take it all for yourself? You little fortune teller." Once again I tried to charge at him, but one of his followers slammed my head against the asphalt in front of the mosque. After that, I staggered away toward home, but I never made it there. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital bed, or so I thought. There were no relatives beside me, no nurse coming to check on me. There was nothing around me. That's when I realized I was in a clinic, not a hospital. I waited and waited, but no one came. Finally, I got up. I was trying to remove the IV from my arm when a mustached nurse suddenly ran into the room and screamed. Anyway, after the usual procedures, I was discharged. On the way home, my father asked, "Are you really a fortune teller? What are people saying about you?" I said nothing. Then he continued, "Did you find the gold first? Or did Fatali?" God bless him for sharing it. But what about you? You wanted to take it all and leave, didn't you? Those shameless people had already eaten the sheep, but they still refused to honor his will. My father continued, "Every family received a jar full of gold." My hand touched the ring. I slipped it onto my middle finger. It was still loose. I asked, "You didn't touch the jars, did you?" My father replied, "No. We're waiting for someone to come and appraise them." The moment he said that, I ran. Nearly 6 kilometers. When I reached home, I kicked the door so hard it flew off its hinges. The jar of gold had been left out in the open, as if it were filled with animal dung. I grabbed it and rushed outside. Fatali and his friends were standing in front of Shaban's house. Everything had been looted. A fire burned near the entrance. Everyone stood there with torches in hand, waiting for Fatali's command. I walked toward them, then smashed the jar against the ground. Gold scattered everywhere. I dropped to my knees and started clawing at the earth. Even I didn't know exactly what I was doing. I was just angry. I emptied the jar into a hole and threw several charred pieces of wood over it. Fatali had sent people to watch me. After I left, he said, "Poor Hassan. He finally had a son after 60 years. But what's the use? His friends expected me to attack. But I never did." When my father arrived, he slapped me across the face. Without listening to a word he said, I climbed the stairs and went to sleep. That night, I could hear cheering outside, the sound of pillars collapsing, and Shaban's house being torn down. The next morning, I woke with a strange pain above my eye. I touched my eyebrow. My fingers came back covered in blood. I rushed to the mirror. The crushed agate stone from the ring had somehow embedded itself deep above my eyebrow. Painfully, terrifyingly. I screamed. My parents and my 2 sisters rushed upstairs. At first, they tried to restrain me. Then my father noticed the shattered agate. He decided to help. He pressed both sides of the wound, and that's when the real screaming began. In the end, they pulled it out with a hookah tong. I had lost so much blood that even the car looked orange to me. I collapsed onto a metal bed and fell asleep. That night, I saw Shaban. Not in the yard, not in a dream. Shaban was standing behind my wardrobe. He wore entirely purple clothing, similar to the garments worn by Arabs. In a deep voice, he said, "Don't worry, evil is far from you and your family. All these people will serve you." I was lying on my stomach. I tried to get up and walk toward him, but it felt as if 2 or 3 people were holding me down against the bed. Shaban threw a seal toward me from behind the wardrobe. Then he said, "Write your problem on a piece of paper and stamp it with this seal. If it is God's will, it will happen." When I woke up, the seal was gone. I convinced myself it had all been a dream, but my metal bed was bent inward. My mother looked at me and said, "You've been asleep for 2 days." Soon afterward, the village filled with land cruisers and foreign cars. No one woke up at 5 in the morning anymore. Everyone had workers, and every night there were celebrations. Now it was only me. and the constant criticism of my parents and sisters. We heard that Fatali had also taken our jar. But life isn't always unfair. 1 month after Shaban's house was burned, the fields caught fire, all except ours. Fatali blamed me. With bribes and influence, he scared away the suitors of my sisters. The villagers hired gods for their land. But this time, a plague struck the crops. A plague no one could see. People only watched their harvests die. Yet Fatali never learned. He claimed he had learned sorcery from Shaban. Not long afterward, the babies began to die. Women said that on the night they lost their children. They dreamed of a man dressed in purple. When two of Fatali's own infants died, his rage consumed him. One day, while returning from the fields with my father, we saw a crowd gathered in front of our house. My father grabbed my arm to stop me from going closer. We had to circle around the entire village through the cemetery. Beyond the cemetery and the farmland was our home. There, in the cemetery, I saw Shaban again, wearing the same purple clothes. When I stopped to look at him, my father shoved me forward. He kept cursing me, and cursing himself for raising me this way. As we walked away from Shaban, a voice echoed inside my head. Be patient, son of Marzia. The voice repeated itself again and again. My father unlocked the door. We entered through the garden. Then he said, Go get the rifle. Anyone who stays here, I'll kill them like a dog. His blood was boiling. Without a word, I went to the basement. When I opened the drawer to get the bullets, I saw the seal, the very same seal Shaban had thrown toward me. I wrote, Let the people leave this place. Then I pressed the seal onto the paper. The words, Ya Azim, appeared beneath my wish. I took the bullets and returned upstairs. My father pointed toward the rifle, telling me to put it back. It was as if death itself had been scattered across the yard. Everyone was gone. Little by little, autumn arrived. Fatali and the remaining 15 families had their eyes set on Shaban's lands. Part of it was even added to the village cemetery. The babies who died were buried there. But every time a body was buried, it would be found above ground the next day. Fatali's second son volunteered to guard the cemetery with a rifle. Just before dawn, 7 or 8 shots rang out. When people investigated, they found him trembling in fear. The bodies had once again been dug up. Fatali's son shook like a leaf and said, It's Shaban. It's Shaban's doing. The number of newborns kept decreasing, and the young people slowly began losing their minds. But grid kept them tied to that cursed land. Finally, after a village council meeting, the 15 thief families agreed to abandon Shaban's lands. Harvest season arrived. My father and I filled several truckloads within a single week. The rest of the villagers had nothing to harvest. They mocked us and called us laborers. They still took pride in their new houses and their foreign cars. Before I knew it, 2 years had passed. One cold winter day, my mother left us forever. Yet Fatali never left us alone. He always found a way to create trouble. The man carried a grudge like a camel carries its burden. If only he had opened his eyes, he would have seen that no one was responsible for his misery except himself. The women still spoke of the man in purple. Some even claimed they had seen him while awake, standing over children. But I never believed Shaban would harm a child. He never held grudges, at least not before he started wearing purple. 4 more years passed. Only my 2 sisters and I remained. My father had also passed away. The 15 thief families were still hanging on until finally they collapsed. Their lives looked wealthy from the outside, but there wasn't even bread in their homes. Little by little, They began selling everything they had purchased with stolen money. A few months later, they were forced to sell their land as well. Using the savings from our harvests, I bought their fields for almost nothing. After all, barren land was worthless. But the moment those lands became mine, blessings returned. The people who once drove foreign cars became workers on my farm. Fatali was the last person to sell his land, but he sold it. Hunger does not care about pride. He left the village and moved to the city. Later, we heard that his car plunged into a ravine, and that was the end of him. After that, no more children died, no more bodies were found above the ground. Sometime later, I decided to uncover the truth about Shaban. Someone introduced me to an old man in the city. He was so old that he asked me to bring him some soil from Shaban's house. He would not come himself. A few days after delivering the soil, I went back to see him. He said, "This man used to associate with them. They took him into their world, and there he has a wife and children." When I asked about the letter, he replied, "Shaban wrote the letter himself. But along the way, the demons altered it." Immediately, I remembered Fatali's words in the mosque about the strange change in the handwriting and the color of the ink. To this day, I have never been able to understand Shaban, how he abandoned his own world and left. Perhaps he had seen more kindness from them than he ever did from people. In the end, life turned in such a way that my two sisters and I became the elders of the village, and Shaban's words came true. Well, friends, tonight's story has come to an end. If you enjoyed it, you can help this video reach more people by leaving a like. On the day of creation, our flower was born with the longing to see you. From the very beginning, we were made impatient. Stay under God's protection. With respect and appreciation, Tiger Moon.